As the cliche goes, April showers bring May flowers. But usually what comes after is the heat and dryness of summer. Hello again, Essay here. And before the hot weather of the holiday shows up, you should indulge in my new short story, The White Cat, a free exclusive on Substack. The links are down below in description. Join Margot Thompson, a beautiful stage actress and recent widow who finds salvation in the form of a white cat during a night of terror. While checking out my oddball thriller, remember that my Glitch series is still available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. The links are down below in the description. While you'll find my peculiar story about a white pussy entertaining, that doesn't mean I'm out of ideas. I still have more stories coming down the pike, so as long as I don't run into any mishaps, you'll see those stories as well. Now let's get back to the video. Hello again. Essay here. Within the last 24 hours on this date, which is currently April the 12th, 2024, the word came out of Florida that Orenthal James Simpson, former running back, pitchman, Hollywood actor, husband, family man, was died of cancer at age of 76. Now, I never met Simpson, nor did I watch any of his football games. A little bit before my time. But I knew of him. Indeed, I saw some of those TV commercials he did, for Hertz. And indeed, one of my all-time favorite films was Capricorn 1. The film came out in 1976, I believe. It was about, basically it was one of those 1970s political conspiracy thrillers involving NASA and a faked landing on Mars. And Simpson, along with James Brolin and a very young Sam Waterston, were playing the astronauts who basically get hooked up into this conspiracy. And Elliot Gould, he was playing this this lowlife of a news reporter who somehow ends up falling into this conspiracy and the only one who can, break it wide open. And the film's actually pretty good. You should look it up sometime. But anyway, what defines O.J. Simpson nowadays is not his football or even his acting career. It's about the death of his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, or I should say his ex-wife, and Ron Goldman. And yet, a lot of commentators right now on the computer, people such as Jeremy from the Quartering, Dr. Steve Turley, hell, even Mark Dice, they all been spinning the legacy of Simpson as somehow he was a forebearer of Black Lives Matter or critical race theory. Now, of course, these people, they're allowed to have their opinions. Doesn't mean their opinions are correct, but they're allowed to have them. Because anyone who has really looked into the life of Orenthal James Simpson, indeed, I saw this great documentary a few years ago. It was a few years back. I think it was on ESPN. It was called, O.J. Simpson, Made in America, and they got into the nuts and bolts of this man's life. For example, I didn't know that Simpson's father was a homosexual, and even though he lived with his mother, he was close to his father. And people who grew up with Simpson said that was a real sore spot in his psyche. And therefore, while he was close to his father, he basically kept that aspect of his father being a homosexual under wraps. And yet, Simpson, even during his days playing for USC, indeed, way back before the murders happened, I used to go past what they call, I think, was it, I forgot the name of that building over at this campus, and I would see his jersey, in the glass case. So yeah, I knew about his football career, but still, I wasn't, let's just say, closely followed his career trajectory. I mean, yeah, I did watch the Naked Gun films. I mean, yeah, they're silly enough. But I wasn't really a close follower of his life or his career. But then when the murders happened, oh man, there was no escaping it. It was all over the TV, all over the radio, all over the newspapers. I mean, you had to have been living under a rock on the moon in order to not know what was going on. But these modern day commentators trying to spin Simpson as being somehow a poster boy for Black Lives Matter? No. Indeed, he's no more a icon of that outfit than Malcolm X or Stokely Carmichael. Or even, oh my God, Huey Newton. Yeah, remember that guy? Yeah, Black Panthers. No, O.J. Simpson and his life is unique and has nothing to do with what's come down the pike since his time. Indeed, when BLM finally became a thing, O.J. Simpson, to borrow an old phrase from the 19th century, was yesterday's man. In other words, his time had came and went. And yet, he will have a lasting memory in pop culture of the 20th century. Indeed, I'm pretty certain 100 years from now, if people are still around 100 years from now, you likely will still able to find old articles, videos even, and perhaps even some of his films. Of course, in what kind of format they will exist, I wouldn't know. But this video is not really an epitaph on Orenthal James Simpson. Actually, this video is about what we can learn from his life. Because if you saw that ESPN documentary, you would tell right away that Simpson, he craved the limelight, the spotlight. He clearly was very craven about it. Indeed, he was making appearances in films back when he was still playing football for USC. Of course, you probably can't really find those films anymore, but I remember reading about them. I thought it was peculiar. Indeed, I remember one film that he appeared in came out, I think, in 1973, and he was still playing football. I can't remember if he was playing football for San Francisco or it was Buffalo. I can't remember now. And I didn't know the film existed, but it was a small little independent film he appeared in, basically playing himself. But it was about him and a bunch of other people who were basically in a group therapy session, talking about their hopes and fears and dreams. Wish I could marinate that film. I saw a snippet of it just out of curiosity, and I said, "Damn, this is a really strange film." I mean, I wonder how they got these people, because it wasn't just him in it. I mean, there was other people who were halfway famous at that time, including what was the guy's name? Jeff Buckley. You don't know him. He was a folk singer from that period. I think I got his name right. I know his son also was a folk singer in the '90s. But anyway, yeah, the guy Buckley, he ended up dying of a drug overdose uh, barely a year after that film was made. And yet, people didn't know who he was when he was alive, because what I remember reading about Jeff Buckley was that he was basically a session musician. Yeah, he wrote a lot of songs and contributed on songs, but he wasn't famous. He wasn't like the damn Mick and Keith of the Rolling Stones. I mean, no way. And yet, O.J. Simpson was in this film with this guy. And I thought it was, and the snippet I saw of this film, Jeff Buckley was talking about his drug habit, which I thought was surprising. But regardless of that, uh, OJ morphing from a football star to a movie star was his natural trajectory. But when the murders happened, all came crashing down. Indeed, in that documentary, it said that when the murder trial was over, he tried to go back to his old life and found out he couldn't do it. And eventually he left California and ended up in Florida. And yet, he still craved the limelight. Indeed, later in life, he ended up on Twitter. Yeah. I saw some snippets of videos that he was posting on Twitter, where he was basically giving his 2 cents into current events. And people were kind of shocked. Some people were surprised he was still alive, but this was just a few short years ago. And I think he did it not because he was really interested in current events. I think he was just trying to stay relevant. So there you go. And yet, it's kind of sad. I mean, first his life started out as a triumph, then a tragedy, and then later in life, it became a farce. And now he's gone. Now I suppose the old man Goldman and the Browns will probably be checking out pretty soon, since they got nothing else to live for now, since the object of their hate is heading off to Forest Lawn, metaphorically speaking. But as for Simpson's legacy, yeah, I think for a long time the murders will definitely define who O.J. Simpson was, and which is a shame, because I think that in the end, we have to look at this man's life. You have to look at it with nuance, something that was missing during the murder trial, I might add. Because I watched the murder trial. Unlike some of these other internet commentators, me and my father actually watched gavel to gavel coverage of that murder trial from beginning to end. Yeah, they used to show it live on the local station here in California, Channel 5, KTLA, and they were showing it nonstop. And my father was recording it, and we would watch it afterwards. And there was just simply no nuance in that case. Nothing. And indeed, to this day, while you have characters like Greg Gutfeld, or maybe a few years back, Norm Macdonald, that old comedian who's also bit the dust, they didn't understand the nuance of that case at all. Because me personally, I didn't know if he was guilty or not. But then I remember both me and my father were watching the evidence, and I will tell you right now, I'm no Hercule Poirot or Sherlock Holmes, but I got 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 brain that works, and I could tell that there was just something off about this case. I mean, there was so many holes in it, and I kept thinking, why is this man even on trial? I mean, because I noticed that the damn every time when the dream team, OJ's defense team, kept bringing up, pointing out holes in the narrative of how the murders happened, they would then on the fly would create explanations that didn't hold water. Like, for example, there was a question about the murder weapon that was never found. And indeed, I remember seeing the footage from the news helicopter flying over his house a week before the trial was supposed to start. And LAPD was out there digging up his front lawn, and they had all these cops and all these forensic people. They're just digging, turning his front lawn over upside down. And Marsha Clark, the head prosecutor, she was out there in her high heel shoes and her mini skirt, and they were clearly looking for the murder weapon. And that made me wonder, why are you putting this man on trial? You can't find the murder weapon. Apparently, they thought it was important. And indeed, when the trial actually happened, they tried to blow it off, saying, "Oh, it wasn't that important." I'm thinking, wait a second, it is important. I mean, you can't have a murder trial unless you can show the murder weapon, and more importantly, put it in the person's hand who you're putting on trial. And they couldn't even do that. And then, of course, there was a problem with the timeline. They kept changing the timeline. Because, for example, I remember initially they claimed that the last time, OJ's ex-wife was seen was, right after 9 o'clock. And then the last time anyone saw OJ was that guy, Kato Kalin, and that was around, I think, after 9:15. Suppose they went to McDonald's, and then OJ basically made Kato Kalin pay for the bill because OJ had a big stack of $100 bills. Yeah, talking about looking to get robbed. And he didn't want to, he didn't want to spend $100 bills on the damn McDonald's, so he made Kato pay for it. Yeah, talk about cheapskate. But anyway, and then Kato said they came back to OJ's place, and then they went their separate ways. And then no one saw OJ again until the limousine showed up before 9:45. And then, according to the limo driver, OJ came out of the place, even though the driver had arrived, I think, a good 5-10 minutes early. And then OJ comes out of the house, all dressed and neat and ready to go. And then, of course, this is where I thought the nuance fell out of the story, of the damn whole criminal case. Because I remember they said that there were witnesses, for the defense, who claimed that they heard shouting from Nicole's house at 9:20. Now, at that point, you say, well, wait a second, 9:20? That's around the same time OJ was with Kato Kalin. Yeah. So how could he be in two places at once? That makes no sense. And then, of course, LAPD showed a video that the cops made showing how long it would take to drive, not speeding, but drive normally from Nicole's house to OJ's house. You know how long it took? 7 minutes. And then, of course, then you look at the timeline and say, okay, wait a second. If you're saying this man murdered two people, and then he drives back in his Bronco to his home, and that means that from the time he drives back to his home to the time the limo driver shows up, he has about maybe 15 minutes? What's he going to do in 15 minutes? And I think that's when nuance went out the window, because anyone who has read Sherlock Holmes knows that Conan Doyle famously wrote that when you remove everything, whatever remains, no matter how improbable it may seem, must be the truth. And these people didn't do that. And the problem, and I think that was one of the first problems I had with that criminal case. Now, did I believe that OJ didn't do it? Well, I don't know, but I know there was something off about the case. And that was just the first problem I had with it. Second problem I had was when they brought in Dr. Lee. And he said that the damn blood drops that were supposed to be in OJ, it had blood preservative in it. And you say, so what? Well, granted, this blood preservative is not something you find in nature. And, it gets worse. Because the police said they found a pair of socks inside OJ's house that had his ex-wife's blood on it. Except there was one small problem. That blood also had blood preservative in it. And then you're sitting there thinking, what the hell is going on here? And Dr. Lee said that there's something wrong with this blood evidence. That chemical should not be in that blood. And that bothered me a lot. And I'm thinking, what is going on here with this case? Are these people actually trying to frame this man? This man who was like world famous even before the murders? Now, of course, some of you think people are right now probably typing, say, oh, but he killed two people anyway. Just shut up. No. Let's not go there, okay? Because believe me, if someone who you knew had gotten murdered and the cops decided to arrest you and charge you with 2 homicides that will likely put you on death row, I think you would want to have nuance in your case instead of people just wanting to hurry up and have a quick trial and a quicker hanging. Wouldn't you? I would. And I think OJ did. And I think that's why, in the end, a lot of people had a lot of doubts on that jury. Because I know a lot of people, smart people who, for the most part, got no axe to grind, would say that I would have a problem sending someone to the gallows who might be innocent. Because I remember Tim Pool, he said that once. I remember in one of his videos, he said that he would never want to serve on a jury because he said that he will always have doubts about whether he did the right thing, and it would bother him a lot if he ended up sending someone to prison for life, or worse, send them to the damn gas chamber or the electric chair, and then find out that he made a mistake and the person was innocent. He said that would bother him a lot. And I think it was because of stuff like that that has bothered the many of the people on the jury. Now, of course, the news media was sitting there creating a narrative claiming that, the jury cut him loose because of what happened with Rodney King and how the cops who beat him up basically had a jury who basically gave them, acquitted them. And I have to admit, knowing what was going on in Los Angeles back in the middle 1990s, remember we did have the 92 riots, and I think a lot of the places that got burnt down were still being rebuilt at the time when the murders happened. So yeah, you could say that as far as racial tensions were concerned, yeah, there's still a lot of raw nerves. But that doesn't mean you just go out and hang somebody just because of your own personal biases. I mean, that's just wrong. Because I remember my father told me about the Scottsboro boys. It was an incident that happened back in the 1930s in Alabama where he grew up. And he said that racial tensions there was as bad as it can get. And when those black men who were basically were vagrants were accused of raping two white women, I mean, can you spell lynching? Yeah, those damn people, they weren't even going to bother with a trial. They're just going to drag those guys out of the local jail and just take them to the nearest tree and with a rope, and that was going to be the end of it. But luckily, those guys weren't lynched. Instead, they had a quick trial and they all got sent to prison. But then a funny thing happened. It took about almost 15, 20 years, but eventually all those guys got released. Because you know what happened? Those Scottsboro boys didn't rape anybody. And the women, they were lying because they were all in, if I remember correctly, my father said they were all living in the same hobo camp together, and the women were basically a couple of whores, servicing the hobos. And when the damn women were moving from one hobo camp to another on a damn freight train, they met those boys on the train and they decided to have sex with them. But then for some reason, those women, they did a 180 and decided to accuse those black men of rape. See the problem? So yeah, when you look at history like that, you would figure you want to have as much nuance as possible because you're talking about somebody's life. But unfortunately, in the here and now, and even during the time of the OJ case, you had a lot of people who threw nuance out the window. Why? For a variety of reasons. Racial animus? Yep. An all-consuming belief that DNA was the alpha and omega of all criminal cases, which it isn't, and general belief that OJ's own personal history with his ex-wife, and indeed, OJ Simpson did smack his wife around, which is wrong. He shouldn't have been doing that. And yet, from what I remember from that documentary about his life, they said that he and his wife Nicole, they had a really complicated relationship. Indeed, it reminded me a lot of the relationship between Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Now, of course, people my age knows what I'm talking about because those two, they had a very volatile relationship, almost as volatile as OJ and Nicole. Indeed. I remember old gossip magazine my mom used to have, like People magazine, and it spoke about how those two had almost like it had a love-hate relationship. Elizabeth Taylor and Sir Richard, and yet at the same time, the two people were just nuts about each other, and yet they kept driving each other crazy to the point where the two people, talking about Sir Richard and Elizabeth Taylor, they ended up getting a divorce only to turn around and marry each other again a few short years later, only to turn around and divorce each other again less than a year after their second marriage. I mean, it was talking about yo-yo. And indeed, when you look at OJ's relationship with Nicole, it's the same thing. I mean, they have a volatile relationship, and the man put his hands on the woman, which he shouldn't have done. And then eventually they got divorced. But then, a year or two before the murders happened, they tried to reconcile. And of course, as some people will say, oh, the woman just has battered wife syndrome. Perhaps. Or, just like with Sir Richard and Elizabeth Taylor, they had that weird love-hate relationship where on one level they had this, for loss of a better word, an affection for each other, and yet on another level they had the ability to push each other's buttons and were driving each other nuts. And in the end, their attempt to reconcile failed. So, okay, so they decided to go their separate ways. And yet, because the kids, Sydney and Justin, the two little ones, OJ and Nicole basically stayed in each other's lives. And this goes back to nuance again, because when you look at various murder cases that happened in the past, like that guy Peterson, for example. I mean, that's a great example, because Peterson, the guy who's currently sitting on death row, in his murder case, he and his wife were not getting along. And he then had a mistress on the side. And he was going to leave his wife. But then, if you remember that case, Peterson's wife got pregnant. And according to family members, Peterson's wife knew that their marriage was on the rocks. And she thought she could fix it by getting pregnant, hoping that by bringing a baby into the family, that it would somehow get Peterson to basically, straighten up, I suppose. Except it did just the opposite. The guy became enraged because he felt his wife was trying to trap him in a loveless marriage. And as we all know, what happened next, the woman ended up dead and at the bottom of the San Francisco Bay. Her and the unborn child. So there you go. But in the case of OJ, him and Nicole, they had divorced, they had gone their separate ways, and they had started new lives together. Or I should say, new lives separate from each other. And therefore, you then had to ask the question, so why would he end up murdering his wife? It meant they're no longer together, they're divorced, divorce is final. They attempted to reconcile, the reconciliation failed, and wait for it, the reconciliation happened over a year before the murders. And therefore, looking at this as you would, as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle would in a Sherlock Holmes episode, you would say, well, what's the catalyst? And that's what I thought was so problem with that murder case. The catalyst was missing. And of course, I remember Marcia Clark was saying, OJ and Nicole supposedly was at a recital for Sydney, and supposedly they sat separate, and they had few words with each other. And that Marcia Clark claimed that somehow enraged OJ, and that's why he murdered her. I mean, really? I mean, because that documentary didn't portray OJ as being like a character from that book, American Psycho. The Bateman character, if you ever read that book. Because that guy was a psychopath and a sociopath. I mean, that guy had murder on the mind 25 hours, 8 days a week, if you read that book. And yet, when you look at OJ's life, there's nothing in there that says that he's a sociopath or worse, a psychopath. I mean, we're not talking about, Ted Bundy, okay? I mean, we're talking about O.J. Simpson. I mean, the guy is basically a lightweight, to say the least. And yeah, he's vain. And he's a publicity hound. But a psychopath? A sociopath? I mean, it just didn't fit his profile. And I think that was probably one of the many reasons that in the end he was acquitted, because there was no nuance in that case. And indeed, to this day, you have people like Greg Gutfeld who still calls him a murderer. I mean, even though you shouldn't speak ill of the dead. But since Greg Gutfeld's a bit of a goof anyway, I think he's just trying to get some quick laughs. But yeah. When you look at all the various holes in that criminal case, and worse, all the funny business that's going on in that criminal case, one can only conclude that the state, the prosecutor's office and the LAPD knew that their case was weak. And some of you are right now saying, oh, well, they have DNA evidence. Yeah, but some of that blood evidence was fishy. Very fishy. Indeed, that Dr. Lee said in the case of the blood on the man's socks, they said that the way the blood stain looked, it looked as though someone had put the blood on the sock when there was no foot in it. Because they said the blood soaked through one side and went right through to the other side. Now, if that was a blood splatter, it wouldn't be uniform like that, as according to Dr. Lee. And like I said, there was little things like that that made you seriously doubt what was being presented to you. Now, of course, as for the whole subplot involving Mark Fuhrman and all that racial stuff, and now I will admit that definitely muddied the waters a lot. It really did. But I think that was just in the case of Johnny Cochran, using any tool in the toolbox to, save his client from the gallows. Hey, I understand that. But when you look at the various evidence in the case, I don't think it was necessary. They didn't have to go that route. And of course, I'm not saying that Mark Fuhrman's a good dude. I mean, he was probably one of those leftovers from the bad old days of, Gates. And anyone who remembers Chief Gates knows that Chief Gates was not a nice guy. And the people around him were definitely not nice people. I mean, anyone who remembers the Rampart scandal knows what I'm talking about. But anyway. But yeah. In the case of that murder trial, nuance was thrown out the window in order to get a slam dunk. And unfortunately, in that zeal to get a slam dunk, they ruined that case. Now, am I saying that OJ is an innocent person? No. I mean, he did put his hands on his wife. Yeah. And he was adjudicated too for that. But in the case of this murder, there was just too many holes in this case you just couldn't ignore. Because believe me, if you presented this evidence in a criminal case that involved anybody else, I mean, if the defendant was Joe Blow and the murder victim was Jane Blow, a decent lawyer would look at this case and say, this case has got a lot of holes in it. I mean, you don't have the murder weapon. You don't even have the bloody clothes. Your timeline's all screwed up because, wait for it, supposedly OJ murdered his wife, went back to his home, and cleaned up and hid the murder weapon in such a way that no one to this day has ever found it. I mean, don't believe me? Ask the people who tore down his house after it was sold and tell me, did they even found like some old rusty bloody knives underneath the floorboards of his mansion after they tore it down? No. So what happened to the murder weapon? And then there was that damn Furman making some cockamamie remark about how he opened up, OJ's Bronco because he saw blood on the rocker panels. You know what the rocker panels are? The rocker panels are that piece of metal plate that's on the bottom of the door well on all cars. The problem is you only can see that rocker panel is if the door is open, but the door was closed. So I'm thinking, wait a second. How's he seeing blood drops on the rocker panels on a closed door of a car door? I mean, you got like X-ray vision like Superman? Little stuff like that went over the heads of most people in TV land. But I saw it, and my father saw it too. We both noticed it. And we kept looking at these damn little holes in the damn evidence, and we kept thinking, what's going on with this case? This case doesn't make no sense. I mean, their timeline was wrong. They can't explain for the missing bloody evidence. And wait for it. And of course, the damn blood drops of OJ and his wife with that blood preservative in it. They couldn't explain it. And then indeed, Marcia Clark tried to claim that the blood preservative in the dead woman's blood came from laundry detergent. Laundry detergent? Are you kidding me? I mean, in order to somehow have that level of chemical in your bloodstream from laundry detergent would kill you outright. I mean, it was little things like that kept me thinking there's something off about this case. The evidence doesn't fit. I mean, it was like the people, Marcia Clark and her staff were in real time twisting the evidence to try to fit a narrative, and the more they twisted it, the more it made less and less sense it made. Because, for example, the Menendez case, which happened just a few short years before the OJ case, those two brothers, they had means, motive, and opportunity to kill their parents. Actually, their father and their stepmother. Because in that case, the Menendez brothers, they had a deep, seething hatred towards their stepmother because their father because their father had divorced their mother and then turned around and married this woman who they absolutely hated. And yet you don't see that in OJ's case. And then in the case of the Menendez brothers, when they killed their father and their stepmother, there was a gap, not of 15 minutes, but of 6 hours between when the two people were murdered and when the two Menendez brothers finally called Beverly Hills PD, pretending that they walked in on the murder scene. I mean, 6 hours? Are you kidding me? I mean, those two no-good brothers could have easily gotten into their father's Maserati and drove all the way to Barstow and buried the damn shotguns and the bloody clothes out there like in Joshua Tree Park somewhere, and then drove all the way back with time to spare before they called the damn PD. In the case of OJ, he didn't have 6 hours. I mean, he barely had 6 minutes. And these people can explain where the murder weapon was, where the bloody clothes are, to this day? I mean, if OJ, came from the planet Krypton and had a big S on his chest, I could say, okay, yeah, OJ, he just went zoom at light speed and put the damn bloody evidence on the moon and then flew back. And I would say, okay, I believe that. But guess what? OJ's not Superman. He's ordinary man. And wait for it, in that murder case, the narrative was that Joe J had no accomplices. In other words, Al Collin wasn't there. His secretary wasn't there. He was allegedly there by himself. So, okay, if he's there by himself, how did he make the bloody evidence just like a Thanos snap, just disappear? See the problem? In other words, there's little holes like that that make you wonder, did they even arrest the right guy? And wait for it, the thing that really bothered me was when they found no blood stains in OJ's pickup truck. They found the blood of 4 people. OJ, his dead wife, that poor kid Goldman, and a 4th person. And I'm sitting there thinking, who's that 4th person? It was never pursued. And I bet you right now, if you went down to LAPD and asked them, hey, did you ever run those did you ever check that damn unidentified 4th person whose blood stains you found on the bloody glove as well as inside OJ's Bronco? Because let's not pretend, that 4th person, that unidentified person, that blood stain was on the bloody glove and somehow ended up in his truck. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, who's that 4th person? The LAPD said OJ was there by himself. So it shouldn't be only blood of 3 people, not 4. So who's number 4? No one knows. I don't think they even ran into the damn prints through NCIC. The blood stain. And I bet you I wouldn't be surprised they even haven't kept it to this day. But whoever that 4th person was, they weren't in the system. At least not back in the 90s. And of course you jump to the present day, the 2020s. I mean, seriously. I wouldn't be surprised they didn't save the sample. Because I bet you if they saved the sample and ran it through NCIC, up there in Quantico, Virginia, where they keep all the DNA samples at, I wouldn't be surprised if the person actually is in the system. And if that person who left that 4th blood stain on that damn bloody glove, then you can go to wherever hell that person is and say, excuse me, how did your DNA end up on a bloody glove for one of the most notorious murders that happened in the 20th century? Huh? But of course, we'll never know. And like I said, those little things like that bug the hell on me about that case. Now, does that mean that OJ got away with two murders? I don't know. Because these people threw nuance out the window and tried to get a slam dunk. And in doing so, they screwed up the evidence so bad that we may never know. And indeed, wait for it, this has happened before. Ever heard of Lizzie Borden? I remember hearing about Lizzie Borden. Indeed, I actually saw that docudrama with Elizabeth Montgomery that came out in the 1970s about the Lizzie Borden murder case. And people thought she had killed 2 people too. Her father and her stepmother. And she got put on trial, and yet she was acquitted, and yet that woman's name was mud for the rest of her short-ass life, just like OJ. But then, wait for it, are you ready? About a decade ago, some forensic experts looked at some of the evidence that actually had survived to this day, and they did a thorough analysis using modern techniques, and know what they concluded? They concluded that Lizzie Borden didn't kill anybody. And indeed, they said that from the evidence that they had that survived, including a broken axe, they concluded that a man had killed Lizzie Borden's parents, or I should say her father and her stepmother. I remember reading that. It was on the computer. I was surprised. I said, what? You mean Lizzie Borden, despite all the vitriol, didn't kill anybody, and that she was accused of killing two people that she had nothing to do with? But of course, now you're saying, but I was in the 1890s, didn't have forensic science back then. True. And then you say, now you're saying, but we got, but when OJ's case happened, we have modern forensic science. Yes. Unless, of course, someone messes with the evidence and just basically muddles everything. And therefore, what's the old cliche? Garbage in, garbage out. So what's the legacy of O.J. Simpson? Well, legacy beyond football and movie business is that when it comes to criminality and criminal trials, you got to have nuance. You can't go half-cocked. You have to get your ducks in a row. And you can't allow overzealous prosecutors and overzealous law enforcement to run the show. Otherwise, they'll screw up everything. And indeed, anyone who's paying attention to the trials of Donald Trump knows exactly what I'm talking about. No joke. Well, that's all I gotta say about the last of O.J. Simpson. That's my opinion.